Hi, I'm going to show you how to download, configure and install MySQL Cluster. So first I've downloaded the install script. I need to make that executable now. Okay, and we'll just clear that and then we'll run the installer. Okay, so I'm just going to accept the terms and conditions. And the first choice is what type of architecture. So I'm running this on a Pentium D machine, so I'm going to choose option number 2. So option number 1 if you have an ordinary Pentium machine. So now I need to decide, do I want to set up a local cluster number 1, and that's what I want to do. So number 3 if you want to set up a distributed cluster, and then you'll need to run number 4 on the other machines. So I now need to download the binaries for this, for MySQL Cluster. So I'm downloading them across the Atlantic now. Shouldn't take too long. After they're downloaded, they'll be unzipped into the directory in which I installed, ran the installer. You can see that's happening now, and then I'll be asked where do I want to install the MySQL binaries. So I'm going to install them in the .mysql directory, which is a subdirectory of my home directory. So I'm going to take that as the default option, so I'll say yes. Create that, and it's now installing them there. Okay, so the NDB data directories need to be installed now, so I'm going to install those in the default directory, and we're going to create symbolic links for them. That's good if you want to set environment variables. So the next step is to configure the cluster. So I'm just going to step through this quite quickly and take the default size for the cluster. You can click H to get help information on different steps. The configuration files are generated in the NDB data directory that you selected earlier, so you can edit those later stage. We can see them here for a 2-node cluster and a 4-node cluster. Now I'm going to set up a MySQL server for the cluster, and I'm going to take again the default paths. I'm going to take the default location for the socket, but I'm actually running a MySQL server on this machine, so I'm already running a MySQL server on this machine, so I'm going to enter a different port for it so it doesn't conflict with the existing MySQL server. So we've now created the my.cnf file for that server, and we're going to start the cluster running, a 2-node cluster. So the init start script is used to start a cluster for the first time. It actually deletes the content of your databases. You only need to run this once, the first time you run a cluster. After this you can run a different script called the start noinit cluster script. So we can see that the management server node started first, then our data node processes started, 2 of them in fact, and at the very end we can see a MySQL server process started, but after we printed out the contents of the cluster. So now we can see the contents of the cluster. ID 1 is the first data node, ID 2 is the second data node, ID 63 is the management server, and ID 3 is the MySQL server. So our cluster is now up and running. So I'm going to change to the MySQL directory, and we can see that our NDB and MySQL binary, the NDB data directory and the MySQL binaries have been installed. We've got a logs directory if anything goes wrong. So I'm going to change to the NDB directory and the scripts directory. And now I'm going to just shut down the cluster. So I'm shutting down the cluster because we've just initialized it, and I'm going to start it the way we normally start it, which is with the start noinit script. And there we go. So again, it's going to start the management server, the 2 data nodes, and then the MySQL server. Now I'll just show you briefly the other scripts that you can find in this directory, and they're used to manage your cluster. You can start and stop MySQL servers. You can perform a rolling restart in the cluster, start and stop a cluster, and we can see them there. It's init start no init, shut down, start a management client, which we'll do now to make sure the cluster is running. And there it's running. So now we can actually log in to the MySQL cluster using the MySQL client, and I'm going to use the test database. So I'm just going to create a table quickly, create table T1, and we can see the tables being created. So I'm just going to insert into T1 a value, and we can see that it worked. Finished.